Welcome, welcome, Rosebuds, to our month-long 31-day Halloween story spookathon. Every day in the month of October, we'll have a little treat for your listening pleasure. Something like a Halloween story advent calendar leading up to the big day of October 31st, where we'll have a grand spooky video for you. Some of the stories are written by yours truly. Half of them are wonderful authors gracious enough to allow me to narrate their work here on Black Rose Reads, and the other half I've pulled from very old SCP archives. And if you're not familiar with that, I'll explain that when we read our first SCP story. Without further ado, let's jump into our first story. This one is about an older married lesbian couple celebrating their anniversary when they stumble upon a strange town that has an obsession over getting them to try their famous pumpkin pie. But why is the question? Obviously, something sinister is afoot. Last Bite of Pumpkin Pie, written by Mary Blackrose. Nadine and Millie were blissfully driving home from their lovely vacation in Colorado. It was a second honeymoon of sorts after 10 years of being together. They decided to drive instead of fly, allowing them to enjoy a bit of roadside Americana. Exploring it to its full extent was something they'd hoped to do for quite a while. That's the second time I've seen that billboard for Georgie's famous pumpkin pie. It can't be as good as your grandmother's, Nadine laughed. I look forward to Thanksgiving every year because of that famous family pie. To be sure, it's the only thing I look forward to when visiting your family. Right? Grammy is quite grumpy the older she gets. So true. Nadine, dear, can you pull off at the next exit? I think that coffee is doing a number on me, Millie said. Nadine checked her GPS and saw an exit only 3 miles up the road. She quirked an eyebrow. Sure, honey. That Georgie place is just up ahead. Millie noticed the inquisitive look on her wife's face as they approached the exit. What is it? The town's called Blessed. She shook her head ruefully. They sure come up with some unique names out here in the Midwest. Millie panned to the main street, complete with a gazebo on a town green. It seemed lovely, the quintessential postcard face of any good old Americana town. White picket fences, perfectly manicured maple trees, and old-timey architecture lined the main street. However, a strange foreboding feeling washed over Millie, although she dismissed it. Probably just my need to go, and oh boy, do I need to go. Millie couldn't spot any modern gas stations or convenience stores as they drove along. No Flying J's or Walgreens. They all seemed to be mom-and-pop shops lining the main thoroughfare. Nearly all the windows had smaller versions of that billboard they saw along the main highway. Stop and try Georgie's famous pumpkin pie. Was that store actually called Five and Dime? Millie mused. Millie? Nadine said slowly. I'm not sure where we should stop. I know, Nadine, but I have to go. Bad. I'm sorry. Just then, a gas station that looked like a blast from the 50s past came into view. Oh, look, a gas station. They should have a restroom, right? Millie sighed with relief. As they pulled their Prius into the station, a man dressed in gray slacks, a crisp white button-up shirt, and a cap came out and stood expectantly by the window. The uniform was completely in sync with the nostalgic era of the establishment. Nadine rolled the window down and gawked at the young man for a moment in disbelief. The works? The young man said pleasantly enough. Millie leaned across her wife. I just need to use your restroom. Sorry, we don't have one that's accessible to the public, but next door is Georgie's Diner. Millie sighed. Thank you. Nadine pulled the car out of the gas station and around to the parking lot at Georgie's. They passed the front window as her wife maneuvered the vehicle into an open spot. The diner had large glass windows, and customers lined each booth. Their lackluster faces stared at both women with such an intensity it gave Millie pause. "Maybe I should just hold it," she suggested quietly. Her stomach rumbled angrily. If only she had to pee. She could just go off the road and into a ditch, but this was number 2. "On second thought, I don't know if I can," she complained. Nadine tried to bring up the GPS on her phone, but the signal had dropped. She frowned as she looked at the patrons in the diner and then at her wife. "I don't know how long before we arrive at the next town." "Would you come in with me? I can't lie, this place is creeping me out." Nadine laughed. "I'm sure there's nothing to worry about." Then she glanced out the window around the parking lot. Not a single car seemed to have been manufactured after 1960. Nadine's eyes flitted back to the diners in the window. She noticed their dark eyes staring intensely at the newcomers. "On second thought," she let the words hang in the air. "Are you sure you can't hold it?" "I don't think I can." Nadine moved to get out of the car with Millie, and they made their way to the door. When they opened it, old bells chimed to announce their arrival. Not that it was needed. The whole place was stone-cold silent, and every diner in the full dining room turned and stared at the 2 women. They were startled when a robust woman with tight red curly hair resembling a fuller version of Lucille Ball said, "Just the 2 today?" she chirped. "Oh no, my friend just needs to use your restroom." The woman seemed to appraise the 2 of them for a moment. "The John's only for paying customers," she deadpanned, her sweet demeanor turning cold. Millie's eyes flitted to Nadine, and she could practically hear her wife's thoughts. For fuck's sake. Suddenly, the hostess was all smiles again and said sweetly, "Have you heard of our famous pumpkin pie? Maybe you'd like to take a moment and enjoy a slice. People always rushing around to get to the next place and don't take time to enjoy the simple things in life. It's awfully good." Nadine's tone was straining patience. "Fine, I'll have a piece of the pumpkin pie to go then." The hostess flashed a crooked smirk and said, "Sorry, we don't do takeout." Millie could tell her wife was about to explode as she turned and gave her a look that said, "Your choice. What should we do?" Sure. We'll sit and have some pie," Millie said slowly. "Can I please use your restroom first, though? I really need to go." The hostess smiled, but there was something stiff about it. "This way. The room's in the back down the hall." The hostess, who was apparently also the waitress, seated them in the middle of the room. Everyone was still gawking at them. A bit of a conversation in hushed whispers began to rise and ebb in the dining room. It was too hard to determine the particulars of what they were saying. Still, it was unmistakable that Millie and Nadine were the subject of discussion. It gave Millie a creepy feeling as she wove through the tables to the back of the restaurant. As Millie sat on the toilet relieving herself, she couldn't help but notice the fixtures. All antique porcelain. The striped ivory wallpaper was peppered with tiny roses, and the room had a cloying fragrance that matched. It reminded her of her Grammy's perfume. The sooner they got out of this stuffy old town, the better. Everything about it was rubbing her the wrong way. Millie washed her hands and returned to find Nadine with 2 pristine slices of pumpkin pie on the table. Nadine leaned across the table and whispered to Millie as quietly as she could, "Let's just have a few bites, pay our bill, and split." Millie nodded once. She didn't have to be told twice. The waitress returned. She had a can of whipped cream in her hand. "We're famous for our pumpkin pie here in Blessed. You won't be disappointed." "You said that already," Millie thought. Even her normal upbeat outlook was beginning to sour. Something didn't feel right. "Whipped cream?" the waitress asked again when they had hesitated. "Yes, please," Millie answered and forced a smile. "No, thank you." Nadine was not hiding her annoyance now. The waitress squirted a generous dollop of whipped cream on Millie's pie, then just stood there. obviously waiting for them to try the pie. Millie felt a sense of dread wash over her. Warning bells were going off in her head that she and Nadine should simply get up and walk out, or better yet, run. However, Millie had been raised to be polite to a fault. She tentatively forked off the corner tip of the pie and brought it up to her mouth. A strange thing occurred then. It was like time stopped as the sweet pumpkin and spice aroma wafted up and hit her in the face with near physical force. Her tense shoulders relaxed, and she was overcome with a new emotion, hunger. Millie felt ravenous for this pie. Somewhere in the back of her brain, she knew she shouldn't feel so irrationally hungry. She should be interested in Nadine and leaving, but then again, it all seemed so unimportant now. She brought that first heavenly bite closer to her face. Everything was moving in silky, smooth, slow motion. She felt that soft orange texture in her mouth before the pie had even touched her taste buds. She knew she couldn't feel a color, and yet she did know. This was going to be the most decadent dessert of her life. She let her lips slide the pie off the fork and onto her tongue. As soon as it hit, she felt consumed by the flavor of cinnamon and cloves bursting on her palate. Distantly, her brain was niggling at some other thought, a warning of some sort, but the more she chewed, the more those thoughts floated away, like a bad dream dissipating upon the break of dawn. The last thought flitted through her mind that she should be aware of someone else important, someone who was with her, but her attention was rapt on the pastry in front of her. She savored each illustrious bite and marveled at how one piece of pie could make her feel so gluttonously full. When she'd eaten the last crumb, she felt herself becoming very sleepy. At last, she looked up from her plate and noticed Nadine. Nadine! That's who she'd forgotten about. She wanted to say something about the glorious pie, ask her wife if they could stay a while longer, have one more piece. What could it hurt? Suddenly, she felt so tired. She had to close her eyes. It was ridiculous to take a nap here, but she couldn't keep her eyelids open a second longer. She just needed to rest her eyes. Just a moment. When Millie began to wake up, her senses returned slowly. She blinked rapidly, trying to stave off the drowsiness. It began to occur to her with rising alarm that she'd been drugged. With even more panic, she realized she was bound. Oh my God, Nadine! Where am I? Where am I? Where is Nadine? She looked around frantically and saw Nadine was asleep on a stone altar to her left. She was on a similar altar to Nadine's right. They appeared to be in an underground cavern. She opened her mouth and screamed for Nadine to wake up, yet she was still groggy and weak from whatever they drugged her with. The scream came out in a croak. She tried to sit up, but her limbs were tightly bound. She could barely struggle. She looked around, and her eyes could make out hooded figures at a distance, surrounding them in a circle and holding candles. She became aware of a low thrumming chant emanating and rising in pitch from the individuals around them. She squirmed frantically to escape her bonds, then stopped short when a hooded figure stepped forward, hovered over her, and removed their hood. The waitress from the restaurant stood over her, staring at her with a look of pity. Millie tried to speak, and then tears began to flow down her cheeks. She was so distraught she could barely respond. "I'm truly sorry about this. It's better if you don't struggle," the woman said with sickly saccharine kindness. Millie calmed herself enough to spit out the words. "It's because we're gay. I didn't think this could ever happen to us," she sobbed. The waitress cut her off. "On the contrary, my dear, this isn't the hate crime it appears to be. Lord Azaliful could care less about your sexual preferences. Human blood from a united bond of love is all he requires, and as such we are kept safe and blessed yearly. Our town flourishes and prospers." She laughed heartily. There were bets, to be sure. She wagged a finger at Millie as if scolding her. Some were uncertain you were even a couple, but then we looked through your phones and saw the beautiful pictures from your vacation. It would appear you've been in love for many years. What did you drug us with? Millie stammered. She could barely form rational thoughts. She had to keep the woman talking, think of some way to escape. Something not of this world. We are unsure how it works, and we don't question it, merely that he provides a means to his ends. It is given in our bountiful harvest. Each year, a glowing white pumpkin is grown, which produces a powerful enchantment. When cooked, its effects are always certain to ensnare our sacrifices. It's very unusual you woke up, the woman mused and looked off thoughtfully. Millie was panting heavily. Panic was beginning to rise in her as the cult's members' chanting was reaching a rising crescendo. She felt as if she was going to be sick. The woman turned her attention back to Millie. There, my dear. The waitress smoothed the loose tendrils of hair from her forehead. You shouldn't have even woken. You're a feisty one, I'll give you that. I haven't seen this in years. She chuckled mildly as if Millie had merely stepped on her toes. Millie opened her mouth to scream, but as she did, the woman shoved a huge bite of pumpkin pie into her mouth. Before she could spit it out, a hand clamped over her nose and mouth, and she was forced to swallow the last bite of pumpkin pie. I wrote this one a long time ago. Just so you know, I do write a lot of stories with LGBT characters. I'm usually a huge stickler about the whole lesbian couples not getting a happy ending trope. I normally don't write that because, well, I think it just sucks and it's such an old, tired trope. But this was horror. In horror, no matter what your orientation, you aren't safe from the monsters, so yeah, that's how this one ended. C'est la vie. If you do like my writing and you'd like to read another story I wrote that had a happier ending for the lesbian couple, you can check out the link down below for my free novelette called The Stranger. I hope you enjoyed this story, and if you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with a friend. All right, rosebuds, that's a wrap. Until next time, which is tomorrow night, where we'll meet back here and read a story about a person being trapped and stalked by a monster in the complete darkness. Written by Michael Kelso. Take care and stay creepy.